If I'm getting blood work through my primary, I know some blood tests cost more than others. What are the most important blood tests the doctor should order? We've talked about this so many times, but you want to go ahead, Ian? Want to tell everybody what to get?
Yeah, so you obviously want all your
What's up guys, Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be reacting to Fouad Abiad, James Hollingshead, and I probably said that wrong, and Iain Valliere talking about what blood tests and tests a bodybuilder should get. So these guys are, top of their sport, and, when people ask these kind of questions, they assume that they have the highest quality version of that information possible. So this was sent to me by a handful of people, and they basically wanted me to go through it and see if I think their recommendations are in line with what I would recommend a bodybuilder myself, or I guess somebody who just wants to stay on top of their health. Obviously, a bodybuilder would justify more frequent testing and more elaborate testing at an earlier age than a regular person. So let's just do this in the context of a bodybuilder. So I'm going to let them go, and I'll kind of interject here and there.
It's probably important. Let's talk. Okay. If I'm getting blood work through my primary, I know some blood tests cost more than others. What are the most important blood tests the doctor should order? We've talked about this so many times, but you want to go ahead, Ian? Want to tell everybody what to get?
Yeah, so you obviously want all your whole lipid profile, so your cholesterol, lipids, all like that. Do your kidney panel, liver, enzymes.
Okay, so they're kind of flying through things here, so I'm going to intervene and actually kind of just give my opinion before they just knock out every single thing, because it doesn't seem like they're going to elaborate too much. And frankly, I'm not going to elaborate too much either. I just want to kind of touch on a few, because a lot of things aren't going to be covered in your basic lipid panel, in your basic liver and kidney panel. For me, these are a few things I think that should be notable before we kind of let them fly through the rest, and I'm honestly going to forget what they said. So for the first thing, he said, so the lipid panel, as far as you would obviously get your standard total cholesterol, LDL-C, HDL-C, triglycerides. But one thing that often is not got, most people don't get, is ApoB count. So for me, this is something I would like to see to take count of the potential atherogenic particles like lipoprotein a, which is something that I don't really see anyone talk about. And this is something that I've spoken to Leo from Leo on Longevity with a few times, as well as some of these more advanced guys who are looking at the, the manifestation of plaque buildup and whatnot, and kind of assessing the details behind how deep you should dive into your lipids in order to assess what kind of risk parameters you have at play based on your current diet and lifestyle. So for me, a very basic panel is fine, but above and beyond that, I would still get that ApoB to get the, atherogenic particles actually assessed. As far as the, it's hard to just even remember what he just said, because he just blasted through 3 panels in 2 seconds. So yeah, I would get a comprehensive metabolic panel, which would include kidney parameters as well as your liver enzymes, ALT, AST. But above and beyond that, I would probably add, things I would add to that are alpha-fetoprotein, because this is one of the best markers to show if you're developing liver cancer, and this is not going to show necessarily in your ALT and AST. And you're not going to just have those guaranteed to be elevated if you have a tumor growing or something. So this is something I would advise adding. GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase, is something I would also add. As far as breakdowns of each one of these markers too, I'll probably do a more elaborate deep dive in the future on different panels, as opposed to just there's no fucking way I'm gonna be able to talk about them all in this one video. The next thing I would add for sure is cystatin C. This is a way to estimate your glomerular filtration rate, your estimated GFR, far more accurately than creatinine. Creatinine is often the default go-to, which is something that is strongly influenced by age, gender, muscle mass, whereas cystatin C is produced by all nucleated cells and is not strongly influenced by these things at all. So it produces a far more accurate result to estimate your GFR, and it is actually way more in line. Clinically, they'll find it's actually way closer to figuring out your GFR or estimating it than you would get through your creatinine. So bodybuilders especially, who have a ridiculous amount of muscle mass, using creatinine as your metric to kind of estimate your GFR is, a poor choice in my opinion. And when you actually look at it in the literature, you can see that when comparing clinical benefits of using inulin clearance and cystatin C for determining glomerular filtration rate in HIV-1 infected individuals treated with dilute gravir. I don't even know how to say that. So what they measured here was comparing eGFR calculated using serum creatinine, using serum cystatin C, and let's see what else, inulin clearance and creatinine clearance. So basically they assessed the biases and accuracy compared of inulin clearance with estimated GFR based on serum creatinine, as well as based on serum cystatin C and based on creatinine clearance. So at the end of the day, what they found was there's no significant differences in serum cystatin C and estimated glomerular filtration rate based on the serum cystatin C between baseline and at 48 weeks. Moreover, estimated GFR based on serum creatinine was significantly less accurate, within 30% of measured GFR than both eGFR CYC, which is the serum using the serum cystatin C, and creatinine clearance, 40% accuracy compared to 93 and 93% respectively. So estimated GFR based on the serum cystatin C was significantly less biased than estimated GFR using serum creatinine and creatinine clearance. No significant difference between, between, where was this? These fucking abbreviations, dude. Then both eGFR based on cystatin C and creatinine clearance, blah, blah, blah. Estimated GFR using cystatin C was significantly less biased than estimated GFR using serum creatinine and creatinine clearance. Yeah, so it's no significant difference between the inulin clearance, which is the gold standard, and eGFR based on serum cystatin C was observed. Estimated GFR using cystatin C was significantly correlated with inulin clearance, which is the gold standard. So the conclusion of the whole thing, sorry if that was really hard to follow, but these fucking abbreviations, I have to keep jumping back up to see. So estimated GFR using the cystatin C serum provided the most precise estimate and most closely approximate inulin clearance in HIV-1 infected Japanese patients with suppressed viremia treated with dilute gravir. We demonstrated clinical benefits of inulin clearance in eGFR cystatin C. This is the first study performing inulin clearance for blah, blah, blah. So basically what they found here is of all of the methods for estimating GFR relative to the gold standard, which would be an inulin clearance test, the closest thing you're going to get via a serum measurement that is easy to get in your blood work is the serum cystatin C, which then would be used to estimate your GFR. And it's the thing that's going to get you the most accurate representation of what would otherwise be the gold standard of the inulin clearance test. So that would be my recommendation for the assessing your GFR far more accurately rather than the creatinine, and that's why. And if you're not going to get the inulin clearance test, like you don't necessarily need to, it's the gold standard, but obviously you can get as close to that as possible within a very reasonable margin with the cystatin C and the cystatin C calculated eGFR. You should probably also get a 24-hour urine collection with like basic urine analysis parameters. What else did he mention? The liver, I think I already touched on that. With the alpha-fetoprotein, the comprehensive metabolic panel, AST, ALT, GGT, cystatin C, how to estimate your GFR properly. Let's see what else he talks about now.
Everything like that. So like in your kidney, you obviously get like your GFR, your creatinine, your BUN. Your liver, you'll get your AST, ALT, GOT, all that kind of stuff, or GGT, whatever it is.
Yeah, so he's pretty much touching on the stuff I said. However, like I mentioned, I would get the cystatin C estimated GFR rather than the creatinine.
You know, you can do your free test, your Estradiol, all that kind of stuff as well. But
okay, as far as your endocrine parameters, getting your total test, your free test, your Estradiol, I would recommend that as well. As far as the assay used though, if you're a bodybuilder, especially one who's using exogenous anabolics, if you don't want cross-reactivity in your test results that artificially inflate or otherwise fuck with your results, I would highly recommend you get your total testosterone measured using liquid chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry instead of immunoassay, because that is going to be highly inaccurate. It's not even going to measure your total test above 1500 nanograms per deciliter in most cases, and you're going to get cross-reactivity of other anabolics in your system that are ultimately just derivatives of testosterone, and the immunoassay test is too shitty to even figure out that it's not testosterone. So you'll get your testosterone artificially inflated with nandrolone, with a bunch of other fucking synthetic anabolics that are not even testosterone. So you might get your test checked on TRT plus nandrolone or something, and then all of a sudden your test levels are way higher than they should otherwise be because you didn't use LCMS-MS to calculate your total T. As far as your free test, the exact same thing is going to happen if you use the free testosterone direct test. You need to use equilibrium dialysis if you want the gold standard for not getting cross-reactivity again. And then estradiol, you want to get the sensitive assay for the exact same reason. Otherwise, you're going to get cross-reactivity with other estrogens in the body, estrone, estriol, whatever synthetic estrogen analogs are produced by these synthetic anabolics that you're using that are substrates for aromatase. These are things that are not often talked about and should be considered when you're getting your blood work done. Paying the extra amount is actually warranted because otherwise you just have a totally useless result anyways if you're on anything except for just straight up TRT. So, and even on just TRT, you should still be using estradiol sensitive. Otherwise, you're going to get a totally inaccurate reading. Like I've got my estradiol sensitive checked versus using Roche ECLA electrochemiluminescence radioimmunoassay, and I've noticed it was like the top end of the reference range versus the bottom end of the reference range using the exact same sample of blood on just TRT. So yes, there is justification for using it even if you are just on TRT. Or even if you're just natural, in my opinion. There's other endocrine parameters you can get, but they're, like getting your gonadotropins checked if you're on exogenous hormones, not too overly useful. Getting some of your other stuff checked, it's kind of up to you how far you want to dive into it and how much money you're willing to spend. So I'm not going to touch on those necessarily in this. I'll do a video in the future, kind of like breaking down each panel, what I would do, like hematology, kidney, liver, endocrine, etc. And then I can dive into them more thoroughly for you. But for now, that is fine.
I mean, the biggest things to keep in check are definitely probably the kidney health and your lipids. I think are going to be the most that are going to cause long-term issues. So those are the ones you want to definitely keep an eye on. I mean, there's also stuff you can do if you want to like other markers, like getting your C-reactive protein tested.
Okay, that's very good to note. High sensitivity C-reactive protein is going to be a measure of inflammation in the body. And I would highly recommend you also get fibrinogen with that, which is something you would get on top of the C-reactive protein to check for systemic inflammation in general. But the HSCRP is very important and often goes overlooked by bodybuilders entirely. So that was very good to mention.
It's good inflammation markers, never a bad call. And when I get blood work, I always get an EKG done as well. And then getting like a calcium score done at least like once a year if you're a bigger guy is probably a good idea as well.
Okay, so what did he not touch on as far as the bloods go? I don't even know if he mentioned a complete blood count with differential and platelets, but obviously, hematology is important, so I would do that. Iron panel, I would probably recommend, especially if you're on anabolics with total iron binding capacity, just like a good iron panel would be solid. What else off the top of my head? Homocysteine might be good to check, especially if you have polymorphisms for MTHFR. Not super relevant, but it's probably good to check at least once or twice. And until you get that in line, because that can be fixed through dietary intervention pretty easily from what I've seen. Thyroid panel, TSH, free T3, free T4. Obviously, if you want to go further with that, you can get reverse T3, thyroglobulin antibodies, thyroid peroxidase antibodies, but at least you should be getting your TSH, T4, and T3. In my opinion, what else? As far as I'm trying to think blood work wise, fasting insulin, I would probably also check. Hemoglobin A1C. Ideally, on top of that, like you would probably also get a oral glucose tolerance test as a more accurate measure of figuring out kind of how insulin resistant and or not you are in terms of your ability to actually get your blood glucose back into line to where it should be. So for me, like I would want to see somebody actually do like their serum glucose and insulin tested at regular intervals after a glucose challenge with a standardized amount of glucose to actually figure out how well you can still control your blood sugar, because a lot of these guys that are blasting GH year round, guys that are using insulin, guys that are eating heavy duty carb dense diets and eating a stupid amount of food, not stupid as in like you're dumb for eating it, but I mean like, like a lot. This would be something to definitely keep an eye on, especially during the off season. So the oral glucose tolerance test is definitely a good idea. Vitamin D, would be good to check. Other than that, there's other like less notable markers, but those are the main ones from blood. As far as like other tests and imaging, he mentioned the electrocardiogram. It's not a bad idea. I would probably get an echocardiogram as well once per year. As far as the coronary artery calcium score, he mentioned how he would get that done once a year. Let me go back and see exactly what he said on that.
And when I get blood work, I always get an EKG done as well. And then getting like a calcium score done at least like once a year if you're a bigger guy is probably a good idea as well.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I think if you want to be extra diligent, I would check your A1C.
Yes.
So, your overall A1C measures your overall sugar level in your body.
Yeah. And then obviously you can check your, if you want to check your thyroid stuff as well.
Thyroid is the other one I was going to say. Yeah.
That's, your fasted, blood glucose, all that kind of stuff is good to test as well. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously we can't expect them to just like remember it all off the top of their head, because it's not like they really, I doubt they prepared themselves for this. They're just kind of talking off the cuff. So I'm sure they would have more recommendations if they actually like sat down and like wrote it out and whatnot. But they mentioned the hemoglobin A1C, and kind of going back to the glucose control, I would still recommend the oral glucose tolerance test, like I said, above and beyond that, as well as the figuring out, like actually assessing your insulin and glucose, like in being able to maintain a high level of glucose control is very, very important for bodybuilders. So they sort of touched on that, but not to the degree that I would like to see somebody actually go, especially a guy in the off season who's using GH, eating high amounts of food. He mentioned thyroid, which is good. As far as like the markers I would get, I kind of touched on those earlier. Circling back to the actual imaging and whatnot that you would get per year, I would get the echocardiogram at least once a year, ideally. Once a year is fine. As far as like a coronary artery calcium score, getting it every year, I think that would be a horrible idea. So that was one thing I highly disagreed with. So if you have, basically what happens is if you have plaque buildup and you create like a complete blockage, that is one of the reasons you could have a heart attack. Now, as far as how calcium builds up, this is in response to like damage. So this is not like something that even makes sense to get at Iain's age. Like for him, if you have plaque buildup, that's not going to show on a coronary artery calcium score. That's going to show up years later after plaque has ruptured and calcification has occurred in response to that as a means of healing the area. It's a responsive healing mechanism. It is not something that just means because you have plaque buildup that automatically there's calcium there. It's a result of plaque rupture, not a result of the direct like buildup itself. So you're only going to see calcium buildup and I get a CAC score above 0 once you're like in like your 40s. Like you're not, they don't even like, I think the statistic is like the estimated probability of a non-zero calcium score for men at age 45 is like 25%. So that means if you are, like most of these tests don't even look at the calcium score underneath 40 years old because it's so unlikely. Like the chances are over 75% that if you are under 45, you will have a CAC score of 0. So for Iain, who's like 29 or 30 or something, to be saying you need a calcium score every year, there's like so much radiation that comes from a calcium score like right on your heart. It is a horrible idea, especially once a year. Like I would get it done once when you're like closing in on 40 maybe. And then after that, you get an assessment if you have any calcium buildup. And then you go from there. Many years later is when you're going to actually have that calcification occur in response to plaque buildup in the past like decade, rather than like right then and there. If you have a CAC score over 0, it would require you to, it would sort of warrant you circling back and looking at your diet, your lifestyle, etc., to figure out like what the fuck caused all that ridiculous amount of plaque buildup to begin with, that caused the rupture, that caused the calcification. But it's not something that warrants a follow-up calcium score every single year. It would warrant a follow-up like a handful of years later to see if it's getting worse or not one every year. Like the amount of damage that causes to your heart on a yearly basis for absolutely is nonsensical to get a coronary artery calcium score every year. And I wouldn't even advise getting one like under the age of 40 probably. I would rather use that money and allocate it towards actual imaging that would be more useful to assess cardiac function as well as to assess my liver and kidneys. Like I would recommend you get like a liver and a kidney ultrasound like once every 2 to 3 years at least. And then from there, if you have something wrong with it, obviously that would warrant follow-up ultrasounds every 6 months until you kind of like resolve it or whatever is going on. But that would be money much better allocated. Like I would argue it's actually damaging to get the coronary artery calcium score on a yearly basis, and it's not helping you whatsoever. It's actually hurting your heart. So I would take that money, put it towards imaging, which could be an echocardiogram for your heart on a yearly basis. I would probably get an fMRI, cardiac fMRI, once every 3 years. It's far more expensive. If you can afford it, I would recommend it in place of the echo during that corresponding year. So it'd be, but at minimum, you should be getting an echo like once a year, in my opinion. And then the ultrasound of the kidneys and the liver, I would probably do that, like once every 2 or 3 years. And that would be money much better spent rather than the figuring out your CAC score at an age that, like, clinically they don't even look for it at like the age that Iain is. Like, it would make no sense. Like, if you had any calcium buildup whatsoever, that would indicate that when you were like 20 years old, you would like built up a shit ton of plaque. Like, it wouldn't really make sense in my opinion. So I disagree with that, and I'm not really sure what kind of like foundation that information is based off of. But for me, I'm more concerned of like high quality imaging of my organs, which would be the echo, ideally an fMRI if you can afford it, and then the ultrasound of the kidneys and the liver, and how frequent that is. It's going to kind of be up to your budget, and if it's covered by insurance for you or not. But you know, that is sort of my stance on the blood work and the imaging. Let's see if they have anything else to say. Okay, it doesn't sound like it. So that's the end of the video, and that is I can do a more elaborate breakdown in terms of blood panels, you know, imaging and whatnot, and other tests to get, but that is sort of my general recommendation for bodybuilders especially. But this is something that is going to be budget dependent too. So a lot of people are going to say, who the fuck is going to get, you know, an ultrasound every 2 or 3 years? Who's going to get an fMRI ever? Who's going to get, you know, an echo? Who's going to do any of this shit? And it's like, it depends on like how much you care and how much money you have that you'd rather spend on high quality tests versus more growth hormone, or, you know, whatever else that you consider useful application of your money. So anyways, those are my recommended tests. So take from that what you will. Thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, check out my blog, moreplates.moredates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplates_moredates, Facebook, Snapchat, BitChute, Twitter, TikTok, Apple Podcasts if you want to listen on audio instead of burn through your data. On YouTube, at the gym, or while you're driving, it's way better to listen on the podcast because you can just download the audio ahead of time. It doesn't ruin your data, and it won't kill your battery either, like watching on YouTube will. If you want to support the channel, you can check out anything I'm associated with in the video description below, my TRT clinic, as well as pre-designed blood panels. And this is something I'm actually gonna have to update. It's actually very difficult to get pre-designed panels made with every single thing I'd want to see without having it cost an exorbitant amount of money. So I'm always working on trying to update the blood panels in my video descriptions to make them more cost effective. And like, I put the bare minimum of stuff I would include, but some stuff is missing if it's not available with certain other things, or the cost just gets too excessive. People are like, wouldn't want to pay the price. So it would kind of like ruin the panel if I included X marker or X marker. So I'm working on it, but the stuff I mentioned is stuff I would get even if it's not available through the panel that I have in my video description at the time of recording. But I'm working on it, and this is certain markers that I would add separately regardless of the cost probably. And as far as anything else you want to support the channel, Gorilla Mind, Nootropic, and pre-workout formulas, I designed from scratch myself based on exactly what I would want to see in the formulas, and I don't outsource it or have anyone design the formulas. I literally write them out from scratch myself on a Word document based on what I'd want to see, with the efficacious dosages found in the clinical literature actually maxed out, the synergies of each ingredient, exactly what I would want to see as a consumer, and anything else I'm associated with, it's all in the video description below. So thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.